You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. Today, my guest is Howard Falco. He's the author of a book called Invincible, The Mindset of Infinite Potential. And I was just telling him offline that he was, thanks. He was gracious to send me a free copy, which my wife grabbed like day one and read the whole thing for like, a couple of days. So looking forward to talking to you, Mr. Falco. And haven't read the book yet, but I have a good reason. My wife did so far, so I will too. But welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Tell me a bit about your background and what led to you writing this book.
So I was sort of a lifelong curious searcher for sort of the deepest answers to the deepest questions I could ask about life. Why are we here? What's the meaning of existence? How do we find happiness and peace? How do we reconcile the indifferences across the globe? And I've been on sort of an existential quest since I was 14. And the first time I was taken on a camping trip and I looked up and saw the stars in the night sky, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I couldn't believe that canopy sat above our head every night. And we didn't understand more about who we are and life itself. And so it set me on this existential quest for insight and understanding. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, left home when I was 18 to go to school out west, got a degree in marketing and finance, went into the finance business, fell in love, got married, had 2 kids. And all this time, these nagging questions were still begging for answers. And I thought I was accumulating things that would make me happy, but I never really got to that state of contentment. And I wondered why. And I started to get really nervous because I was building a career, I had a family, and I realized that until these questions were answered, I didn't believe I was going to be happy. And I thought the last thing on my list to being happy was millions of dollars. I was working with people that had more money than they knew what to do with. A lot of were not happy. And that when I realized that really shook me because I was out of answers. And that's when I really got to this guttural yearning point at mid 35 and sort of threw my hands up to life, the universe, whatever your idea of God is. And I just said, I'm ready to understand more. And then a couple weeks after that, I was graced with an unbelievable insight on the idea that happiness was really about something we experience from the inside out. In other words, we think we're trying to get it with outer things, but it's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it. It never really worked. And so when I realized that, and this was 2 weeks after this deep questioning, I was in a seminar, and that's the guy was talking about trading the markets, and he was talking about how you create the whole experience, how much money you put in, what vehicle you get into, how long you're in, when you get out. So you're creating the whole experience. And I thought, wow, I'm not only doing that with finance and investments, I'm doing that with life. And so it sort of cracked this door open that I thought didn't exist, which was exciting. And then the second thing, Richard, that kind of blew the doors off was this idea that I had asked these questions 2 weeks ago, and I connected the dots. I saw that this was part of my answer. This was life talking to me. And that got me excited because then I realized that life is always talking to us. It depends on how mindful you are and how much you're listening. And so for the next 6 months, I was like a child where I'd go into life and I was just like, where's the insight going to come from next? Because I got more questions. And
So what does that mean? Life is always talking to you?
it means that when you have a sincere yearning and questioning about something about life, life uses everything at its disposal to get you that awareness and that insight, whether it's something you manufacture by yourself, maybe like this podcast, or whether it's a challenge you go through or a crisis or an experience. There's something in it that life is trying to grace you with, some understanding about existence, about who you are, and about your connection to life. And I think the more mindful we are, the more we see that connection, and we're in that flow of insight and information. And that's the place I was in. And then 6 months later, I had this grand experience that sort of blew my mind, both literally and physically, where the download was so great that I knew my life had changed significantly, and I was going to spend the rest of my life honoring this insight and these understandings. And that's when I wrote my first book, I Am, and started to go out in the world and teach and speak, and then led to work with athletes and individuals and et cetera, which led to 2 other books, including the recent one, Invincible.
What was the prompting, or what was the the experience, what did it say to you?
Well, what it did was it knocked all the dominoes over of all the questions. Not all, I got to be careful with that. 99.9% of questions. It was like I was this hungry traveler, like desperate for food, and I opened the door to like a Knights of the Round Table feast. And so what it told me, I can give you sort of the short, quick bits of wisdom, but keep in mind it's going to be like getting the answer to a math equation. But the real wisdom comes in knowing how to put the equation together, which is why I wrote the books. But everything is energy. We're conditioning, our mind is conditioned to experience life in a certain way until it changes, until our consciousness expands and we understand ourselves differently. Each one of us is worthy of wisdom and insight, which leads to happiness and contentment and peace. At the end of the day, I know this, again, these are sort of platitudes, but truly love is all there is, really, at the end of the day, when we break through to this understanding. And life goes on and we have to continue to create and be involved in life. So those are some of the quick kind of bigger answer highlights, but it's really how you get to that state that is the true wisdom.
What state are you trying to get to? Like a dialogue back and forth with the universe, or just a state of where you're feeling contented?
Yeah, I would say feeling contented, at peace, happiness, understanding that when you go through a crisis that it's not the end of the world, and having the wherewithal and the awareness to be able to react in a way that's conducive to getting out of that crisis in a much quicker fashion, ending suffering that you experience mentally, and even to a certain degree, physically, shortening the time length of pain in general. It all comes from a deeper and richer understanding of who you are and how life is actually working with you on this sort of journey we all take of this infinite creative experience we're all on. So it's priceless information for people that are looking to understand how to go through life in a more empowered and inspired way versus a more fear-dominated way.
Well, what's an example of that?
Example of that is like focusing on the worst case scenarios moving forward when in front of us, there's nothing but infinite possibilities that exist. So when fear dominates the mind, it takes people to a very narrow view of what is possible that's only focused on the negative. And because it's only focused on the negative, and that's where the belief system is coming from, the energy that we're putting out is actually moving the needle of probability towards the negative experience. It's not a certainty, but it moves that needle of probability in favor of the negative experiencing coming together. So I guess our practical experience, you're in a relationship and you fear the person leaving you. So you become controlling, insecure, always calling them, needful. That energy ends up working against you because the other person ends up not being able to breathe in the relationship or feels that they're trying to be controlled. And it ends up, the needle of probability moves towards that relationship ultimately not making it unless that individual starts to trust more and relax more and trust in something good unfolding. Whereas a person in a very contented relationship or is happy with themselves, content with who they are, is looking for love from someone else, when things don't go well, they have this greater understanding of themselves that says, hey, I'm going to survive no matter what. I trust in who I am and my ability to love and be loved. And therefore, I'm going to give it without control. And that ends up being very attractive. And the relationship they're in has a higher probability of staying connected for a longer period of time.
So what are some of the commonalities that people are stuck on?
Well, in my experience in working with, oh my gosh, now it's been probably thousands of people. So the commonalities are a lack of a sense of worth. And that lack of worth to a certain degree then limits what they can create for themselves until that worth is increased, till that belief in themselves is increased. And again, that lack of worth is not anybody's fault. It comes from childhood trauma, from the way they were nurtured as a child or the lack of it, experiences they went through as a teenager, negative experiences and socially with girls or boys in sports that had a negative effect. And even our genetic have a certain impact on us from previous generations if there's been a lot of strife and trouble. So we can carry those things into life and it can cause us to go in this cycle of pain and suffering until we realize that we have the ability, the precious ability to rewrite our narrative at any moment we choose. And that's what's so exciting that I discovered about life is that it's our narrative, our truth that we hold. And that's why the first book was titled I Am, because it's those core I Am statements that life is trying to fulfill, good or bad. And so self-awareness sort of wakes us up to our story. Whereas before it was sort of an unconscious process where we didn't realize how much we were beating ourselves up negatively and how that was having an impact on the trouble we had in life and the strife, because life was meeting us with exactly what we thought was true. And when we wake up to that, we're like, wow, I don't want to create that anymore. So how can I challenge some of these thoughts and authentically replace them with a different sort of faith in who I can be and what I can experience? And can I be vulnerable enough to walk through my next week, 2 weeks, month of life in that state of hopefulness and inspiration and trust until those conditions start to change? But it's a very exact process with life. It's actually, I mean, it's the most exciting thing I've discovered in this whole path.
What, how to see life in a different way, or what is the most exciting thing?
How when you change the way you look at who you are, when you authentically see yourself, forgive yourself for something in the past, end the poisons of guilt, shame, and regret, and finally liberate yourself, how that energy of your new state of mind and the way you're feeling about who you are and letting a little more of that self-compassion, respect, and love come in, and how life then immediately starts to begin to reflect that back to you in the business conditions, relationship conditions. I've done this with athletes. That's been really fun to do. And there's several examples in Invincible about the athletes I've worked with at the top level in the world who shifted their mindset on who they were, and boom, championships, victories, miracle plays occurred, great season. But it took this shift in who they are, this expansion, for them to reach a new sort of circumference of possibility. It's like in the book, I describe it like we're all in these fields of possibilities that are like bubbles. And the smaller you look at yourself, the more limited you see yourself, the smaller that bubble of possibility is. But as soon as you start to see yourself in a new way because you've self-reflected, changed the way you feel about yourself, start to feel differently, that bubble of possibility starts to expand. And you can now experience more possibilities that are in line with your dreams, your hopes, desires you've had that previously you may not have even thought were possible. Very exciting.
So what are some elements of this like realigning or realization? What do people have to ask themselves or think about?
Yeah, that's a great question, Richard. So in the book, I actually developed this book in 8 steps. So the first step in the book is realizing your infinite potential. And it talks about this idea that we're in this infinitely creative universe and we're part of it. That means we're endowed with that same ability. Now, how much we tap into that power depends on how we write our story. And then step 2 is understanding your identity, how it's come together in the past and how your past has unfolded in a certain way because of that. And then step 3 is learning how to direct your ego, which is in charge of protecting, defending, and creating and validating that narrative. And so once you start to see that that's your ego's job, is to go out and create what you believe to be true, negative or positively, then real time you can start to become self-aware of when your mind is going to a place that's going to take you down a road that could possibly create more suffering again. And you can catch yourself and you can start to redirect. And then step 4 is about dismantling self-limiting beliefs, because once you realize that you have the keys to write your story, the only thing that will hold you back is any limiting beliefs that you hold. And so it takes you through a process of learning how to surface these beliefs up in your mind so you can just ask yourself a simple question. Do these negative beliefs or limited ways that I see myself serve me in what I'm intending to create now from this moment forward? And it talks about ending these manipulative sort of ideas of guilt, shame, and regret, and seeing more of, I'm going to use a really big term here, seeing more of your perfection, your moment-to-moment perfection as a human being, unfolding the best you know how at every step of your journey. So as you start to learn more of that, then you can see more of your unlimited potential. And then part 2 goes into breakthrough, where you learn how to liberate your soul to new possibilities and embrace more of this new narrative through the power of I am, through these declarations. A lot of people, Richard, do sort of these mantras or these sayings, but they don't really have a lot of impact because the core idea, the truths that they hold about who they are don't match with the statement. So it's I am abundant, I am loving and have the capacity to be loved, I am successful in my business. But if the beliefs on the inside don't match, then it's sort of what's kind of like a spiritually empty behavior. So to really harness that power of I am, you have to be first align how you look at yourself with a greater field of possibility that you're ready to embrace. Then those I am statements become powerful. So that's step 6.
So how do you make these statements if, let's say you're at a point where you feel like you've never done really anything significant in your life yet, and maybe you're like 20 years old, what do you do then? How do you salt the tip jar?
Yeah, exactly. So the first thing is you have to decide what it is what do you want? What do you want to be different? Or if you don't know what you want, start with what you are not happy with in your life. Start with the contrast. What don't I like? Well, I don't like that I don't have a relationship that I'm happy with, or I don't like that I don't have a job, or I don't, know what I'm passionate about. So then you can flip it and go, okay, I want to find my passion. I want to find someone I can connect to in a relationship. I want to find a job that fulfills me. So you can start to build your mind towards a pointed intent. And then once you have the intent, then you can start to ask yourself, how do I feel about myself? And do those beliefs align with creating it? So if I don't feel worthy, how can anybody else see me as worthy or connect with me and feel that I'm worthy? I have to see my own worth in order to begin to go out there and attract someone who equally wants to share that with me or connect with me like that. Or if I don't feel I'm capable of handling a lot of money or making a lot of money, then how am I supposed to get an employer to reward me or to meet me? You know the old saying in business, right? People will pay you what you believe that you're worth. So this is the process of constructing a mind that can align or begin to open that field of potential for you to align with it. And don't get me wrong, there's trust in this process, because when you plant a seed, you don't get to pick the fruit the next day, right? It takes nurturing, and the soil has to be conditioned, it has to get watered, it has to go through some storms, it has to be tested, before that tree comes up and it's stout enough to produce a crop. And it's the same way in your life. So the 20-year-old that you asked about, first they have to decide what it is they want. Then they have to become self-reflective enough to see if how they think about themselves aligns. And the book guides you through that entire process.
Okay, so you don't have to be, older and have been through a lot of life experiences to benefit from it.
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, the younger minds are even more open. Sometimes if you're older, you've got your beliefs are kind of layered in. It takes a little bit more heavy lifting, to kind of knock away some of these beliefs that you've kind of anchored onto in your life. Like, oh, it takes money to make money, or, there's no good women out there. There's no good men out there. Those are sort of more hardened the older you get, and really takes an open mind to begin to trust again, to be able to go out into that field of possibility.
Well, what was some of this like for you? Like, what were some of your breakthroughs or beliefs that you had to change?
Well, my entire life, as I looked back on it, it's, I wanted to, I had an image of the person I wanted to fall in love with and get married. I felt I was worth it. It took a lot of patience and a lot of lonely nights, in my 20s until we finally met. But here we are 31 years later and 2 kids. The first job I had in finance, I didn't have enough money to go to, my parents didn't have enough money to put me through college. So I had to figure that one out. And I was able to do it somehow by some grace of the universe or God or a miracle. I was able to put myself through school, get a degree, build a business. So that helped. And then of course, the big one, which was, finding the answers to life. That was kind of a quest that I had, and I put my mind towards it and kept going and through the ups and downs and challenges and heartaches and griefs, but kept pressing on, believing that I could understand, that the puzzle could be solved. So those are some of them. I also put a couple really interesting stories in the book. One was about when I was in the finance business and I got my first really big order. It was the way that I went about it and how I had to keep my mind on what was possible, even though coworkers and other people were coming at me with why it can't happen and why it won't happen. Like a lot of people in life do sometimes when you're on a positive path, a lot of the negativity can come at you. And I just stayed with the blinkers on and looked straight ahead and until it came to fruition. And then there was another really fun story about, I can tell the story. It's a story in the book. When I was a kid, I was like 14 years old. I used to watch golf on TV with my grandfather, and we were watching, I think it was the 82 US Open at Pebble Beach. And there was the winner. I think it was Tom Watson at the time. He held up this beautiful trophy, and I loved the game. And I said to my grandfather, I go, that's going to be me someday holding up that trophy. He kind of laughed at me. And in my mid-30s, I was playing private club in Arizona here, and we were the last ones in the clubhouse walking out, and we walked by the trophy case, and I was looking at some of the trophies in there, and then I noticed one in the very back of the case, and I said to him, that's the U.S. Open trophy. And he said, I don't know, which I was disappointed in that he didn't know. But I said, that is the U.S. Open trophy. So I pulled out my flip phone. This was like 20 years ago. And I'm like, oh, I want to take a picture of that. And all of a sudden, this kid comes running up to us, the shoe valet guy, and with the key. And he says, hey, hang on. That is the U.S. Open trophy. He goes, let me open it for you. He goes, and I thought he's opening it for me so I could take a picture without the glare of the glass. And he reaches in the back of the case and he grabs this U.S. Open trophy. He goes, here, you hold it. I'll take a picture of you. So I give me the trophy. I look to my left and then to my right thinking, is the USGA police going to come grab us for touching the trophy? Because it's like the Stanley Cup. And I held it up. I looked at all the names on it. I kind of smiled like I just went through 4 days of the toughest test in golf, and he took the picture. And so I got home later and I walked in the door and my wife saw me smiling. She goes, oh, you must have played well today. And I said, well, not exactly. I said, but I did get to hold the U.S. Open trophy. And she said, well, that's amazing. She said, how'd that happen? I was telling her the story and all of a sudden it hit me. I'm like, oh no. She's like, what? And I said, when I was a kid, I put this intention out to the universe. And I said, that's going to be me someday, holding up the U.S. Open trophy. And I said, why when I was a kid didn't I say, that's going to be me someday, winning the U.S. Open? So the moral of the story is that life listens to your intention and it never forgets. And so you have to be very specific about what it is you want. I was pretty specific. I'd be holding it. In another lifetime, I'll say, that's going to be me winning it. But I thought it was a fun story to put in the book to show how important it is and how life really knows what our intentions are. And if we stay long enough with it until we get close enough to the conditions, it'll help it materialize.
Okay. So this book, is there going to be a sequel, or is this book convey what you want to convey, or?
So, well, I mean, there's so much in the book that has, it just came out. So it's a lot to digest in there, and it is my third book out there. And people ask me that. I'm like, it's a little bit like asking a woman who just gave birth, are you ready to have another baby? It's like, so there's going to be a lot of time for me to go out and teach and speak and share this insight and information with people because it really is life-changing work for people. But, there's always more to write about and more to talk about as the years go on. I just think this one just came out. So I'm going to give this a chance to get out into the discourse and continue to work on making sure as many people know that this work on the power of mind and empowering your mind to an invincible mindset exists.
Okay. So where can people get the book? Is it on Amazon yet or about to be?
Yeah, no, it's on Amazon. Barnes & Noble, should be in any independent bookstore. It's Invincible, The Mindset of Infinite Potential and the Secret to Inevitable Success. And it's also on Audible in my voice. That was one of the things I wanted to make sure happened was that the Audible version, and I was able to read it just like I read my other two books. So it's on all those formats, Kindle, regular paperback, and Audible, and you can get it anywhere books are sold.
Last question. What was it like reading your own books? What did that do for you?
It was nice to be able to put the passion and the energy behind the words. Like, people can make up my voice in their head as they read it, which is great because there's a lot of energy in that book. I mean, that book, power pack. But to be able to read it and infuse the inflection points and really put this passion that you can probably hear in my voice and excitement into the words was really great. So I was very grateful to be able to be the narrator of my own work.
Okay. Well, very good. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. And I encourage people to check out your book and, hopefully benefit from it. So thanks for coming here. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. It was great to be able to talk to you about it and share, Richard. Appreciate it.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.